Wow. Hello. Hello, welcome to the Humanities Center for this latest session in our series on the mountain. As those of you who have been regular attendees will have noted, one of the themes that has been bubbling up under the surface this semester has been the pull and the allure of the mountains, what it might be that draws so many people to scale these vertiginous and frightening heights. And to offer their thoughts on this fascinating subject, I am delighted to welcome today's three speakers. And I know that none of you have spoken before in this landscape series. It's always nice to welcome back previous speakers, but it's very lovely as well to have people who've never contributed to this before, so especially lovely to have you here. Thank you all for coming. Brittany Asaro received her PhD from UCLA and is Director of Italian Studies and Assistant Professor in the Department of Languages, Cultures and Literatures. Before joining the USD faculty, she initiated the Italian program at California Lutheran University. She is an affiliate of UCLA's Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies and serves on the executive board of the Renaissance Conference of Southern California. Dr. Asaro's research focuses on erotic philosophies and love motifs, as well as the depiction of women in medieval and Renaissance Italian literature. She has published articles on Boccaccio's Decameron and has also co-edited a volume of Carlo Goldoni's comedies. Among the other exciting elements of Dr. Asaro's career, she has served as an interpreter at San Diego's Comic-Con and at the Special Olympics, and has worked as an artisanal chocolatier in Florence and at a medieval fortress turned winery in Chianti. Mark Ceder is the Assistant Director of USD's Outdoor Adventures program based within the School of Leadership and Education Sciences. Mark has been a key part of this USD program for 15 years, overseeing nearly 1,000 trips during this tenure. Born and raised on the East Coast, he studied group dynamics, leadership, and interpersonal communication at Villanova University before earning a master's degree focused on adventure education from Western Illinois University. His work focuses on fostering personal growth, healthy relationships, and tolerance for uncertainty through experiential learning. Using natural landscapes and adventure travel, Mark creates risk-aware, impactful learning experiences that transform lives. And Diane Keeling received her PhD from the University of Colorado Boulder and is professor in the Department of Communication. Dr. Keeling is a rhetorical scholar whose research, published in such venues as Quarterly Journal of Speech, Rhetoric Society Quarterly, and Critical Studies in Media Communication, emphasizes interdisciplinary relationships, particularly between rhetoric and the sciences. Her interests in rhetoric include tropes, science, race, gender, intellectual histories, and coalition building. Dr. Keeling is a member of the Rhetoric Society of America, the National Communication Association, and the Organization for Feminist Research on Gender and Communication. She is the faculty producer of USD's podcast, There's More, which is a collaboration between the Humanities Center and the Changemaker Hub, and she is also the current chair of the college's academic assembly. So I'm very, very, very excited to have the three of you with us today, offering their thoughts on the allure of the mountain. Please give a warm welcome to Brittany Asaro, Mark Ceder, and Diane Keeling.
Thank you so much, Brian, for inviting me to be a part of this series. I am delighted to talk about the allure of the mountain for me, and particularly thinking about some graduate school work that I did, not only where my graduate school was, which Colorado, as you heard, but also the training that I received there that I really don't use much anymore, particularly with the work of Bataille, who I'll talk about, and getting to bring that back in. So thank you. On the screen, you see a picture of Crested Butte, Colorado. It's known for its crest, like a wave crest. This is my home mountain of where I ski, also in Gunnison County, which is home for Professor Kevin Guerreri. This is where he was born and raised. As a rhetoric scholar, I can't help but start with etymologies of the term mountain. Etymologies orient us to where words have been, who they've been used by, what have we been doing when we use those words. Friedrich Nietzsche, German scholar who famously was trained as a person who studied etymologies. This is a field called philology. He would interrogate specific terms and their tropic relationships. So when you look at the history, how do those words express themselves and show a transference? So all language is constantly moving, and that's happening through tropes, figures of speech. So our language changes, evolves, and you can see the history of the word mountain here, some of those changes. But the word allure, which lure has a variety of meanings as well, including calling, bait, a return, and so it has that sense of movement as well, depending on the communities that have used it. The discipline that I'm referring to is called philology, again. Philo from love, and logy as in logos, words, speech, reason. And you may note that the ology of philology is part of many disciplines, biology, ecology, psychology, for example. Sometimes this is translated as study of, but its roots are in logos. Plato famously said that he was a lover of wisdom and not words. So philosophy, the philo and sophos, is lover of wisdom, and not logon techne, the art of words. But so, as many sophists have pointed out, based on his critique, you have to use words to form and communicate your wisdom. So you can't escape the logos. Rhetoric is a part of all of the disciplines, and this is why I am an interdisciplinary scholar. So on to our etymology. Certainly one that recurs in this presentation, certainly, but particularly important for what I'm talking about is mountains, their nature of elevation, as it says, more or less abruptly, attaining a conspicuous height. And in my case, preferably a more abruptly attained conspicuous height, for gravitation, for speed, to race across the mounds of powder on the mountains. I took up skiing when my partner Tom gave me a set of skis as a graduation gift for earning my PhD. The skis were also a not-so-secret gift to him because I was a prolific snowboarder. Brittany was just sharing that she grew up skiing and has just recently grew up snowboarding and switched to skiing. I earned, again, my master's and PhD on the Front Range of the Colorado Rockies, and I had a season pass every year. If you do much mountain winter sporting, you're likely familiar with the wait time that snowboarders need to put on their equipment at the top of the mountain, or how snowboarders have to unbuckle the board if they come to a traverse and they need to skateboard or walk across the traverse, and skiers then have to wait for them. And so skis are always attached. They just go. You have poles, lots of conveniences there. So my snowboard was a barrier to Tom's speed, and this was a gift for both of us because I really learned to love it. I keep this photo of Tom and I in my office of the day that I graduated and the day that we both took off on our journey across country skiing using the Icon Pass. You'll note that he's in a cubby made of Nietzsche because he shares Nietzsche's diagnosis of humanity. which is a not so pleasant one. Feels that we are selfish creatures, pessimistic. We call this nihilism. Is there meaning to life? And this is something that he has struggled with, and I'm going to weave that into the story of skiing as well. The gift of the skis was accompanied by, again, this international trip chasing storms at ski resorts on the Icon Pass. I graduated in the winter and had not yet started my first academic appointment at the University of Maine. So I got extensive private lessons from a man who regularly threw 360s and backflips at the resorts. And together we went on this months-long journey where I depended on him to teach me. And there were plenty of opportunities to also test our relationship. We were not yet married. But we made it. We traveled from Canada to New Mexico, and I became a fellow skier. Fellow skier, trying that one. I was not yet as ambitious as Tom. He likes to take steep terrain with cliffs. This is just one of the... Yeah, he just likes to go for it. The steeper, the better. I'm more a lover of what I call my winter wonderland rides. These are tight trees, but powder and moderate elevation slope. But I do like to go around the trees. But to get better, I did follow him, and I like to take videos to share with his family. He notoriously hates photography, but this also means that I have to get to the place where he goes to take these videos, and I'm not nearly as fast. I'm getting closer to him, but then I have to go down the same. It's a different angle looking down. Hard to capture that perspective, I find, in videos. And again, I don't seek out cliffs for myself, but I do take accidental cliffs by following Tom. I eventually got a job here in San Diego, and Tom decided to commit to moving from Wisconsin, where he had a seasonal business, installing pier lifts for boats and also boat piers. So I learned that when I moved to the Midwest for undergrad, that lakes in Wisconsin freeze, and you have to take out piers in the fall, because if you leave them in the winter, they will break and float to the middle of the ice. And so he made a business in this small town of installing people's piers. He decided to sell that company and then to move out to San Diego, invest all the money that he had received from the business into his retirement. And then he was thinking, now I can do anything. I will just have my retirement taken care of, and it doesn't matter what I do. He also didn't like working just for people who lived on lakes installing their fancy piers. As he did the search here in San Diego, he realized that he was actually just not content with anything. If you knew me personally from 2014 to 2020, you likely know, or maybe I was talking to you about jobs for Tom. He was looking for meaningful work. He tried EMT, helicopter pilot, graduate student for nursing, or environmental ocean sciences, or something. Wildland firefighter, lifeguard, working at a food bank, Navy SEAL. Nothing was meaningful to him, sensing the Nietzsche thread. This put the toughest strain on our relationship. Tom didn't want to settle. He saw how much I loved my job and wanted the same, but I needed stability. So after many years of trying all sorts of professions, he realized he just needed to chase his dream of becoming a ski patroller at a mountain resort. As he shared with me, mountains always called to him, the root of allure, to lure, to call. In 2021, he got a job as a boot packer at Crested Butte, and then the next year they offered him a job on the ski patrol. He was also invited to do bike patrol the next year. You see on the bottom that I fell off my bike. I'm a lot better staying on my skis, but he was riding with me, and he helped to wrap my bandages. He was carrying all his equipment. And the worst part of the job, he says, is the paperwork. And he asked that I just don't report it, and then he didn't have to do the paperwork. In 2021 was the first year that he worked at Vail. It was also the first year that Vail Resort, or the first year working at Crested Butte, that Vail Resorts took over. Previously, it had been an independently run resort. But global conglomerates were steadily buying up smaller mom and pop shops with a local vibe and turning them into luxury resorts. To give you a sense of this, our monthly rent in 2021 was $2,300 a month. This year, it will be $3,500. Kevin Guerreri can share more about that with you. As he grew up in the area, he has seen the effects firsthand to what that is doing to the community. Tom's rent costs more than his pay as a ski patroller as well. When Vail took over, they changed the pay structure, and they took away benefits related to overtime, and now ski patrollers can't make overtime, and so many of the men are not able to even survive. They're living in, this is common, living in vans or at roommates of 4 people in really small units, not unlike dorms. So even though that they have a union, they believe that Vail is still resistant to them, and they haven't invested, and maybe because of the union, they suspect they haven't invested in keeping up the equipment of the ski patrollers, which seems really odd because that's part of the safety of the resort. Despite the cost, however, monetarily and otherwise, and despite saying he won't return at the end of the season for the past 2 years, Tom keeps going back year after year. And there's something for him about the thrill of the mountain. And I would also suggest it's about the privileged position that Tom is in to seek this kind of job, and also for myself to participate in it. What is it about staring death in the face at the edge of a cliff and jumping off? Why does ski patrol settle his Nietzschean nihilism? What might that tell us about the ski industry and the thrill seekers writ large? I immediately thought, here's Kevin, he really shreds on the mountain, he's quite good. I immediately thought of the work of Bataille's Erotism, Death, and Sensuality. Bataille's a French intellectual philosopher, continental theorist, and this passage in particular, I think, speaks well to one of the book's main arguments. There's always some limit which the individual accepts. He identifies this limit with himself. Horror seizes him at the thought that this limit may cease to be. But we're wrong to take this limit and the individual's acceptance of it seriously. The limit is only there to be overachieved. Fear and horror are not the real and final reaction. On the contrary, they are the temptation to overstep the bounds. We know that once we are conscious of it, we have to react to the desire ingrained in us to overstep the limits. We want to overstep them, and the horror we feel shows that excesses, what excesses we shall be brought, excesses which, without the initial horror, would be unthinkable. If beauty so far removed from the animal is passionately desired, such as mountains, it is because to possess is to sully, to reduce the animal level. Beauty is desired in order that it may be befouled, not for its own sake, but for the joy brought by the certainty of profaning it. And I think about these particular passions, about fear and horror and limits, and how it really is about subversing those limits within us. And Bataille also drew a lot on psychoanalysis. And so this sense of when we are born into the world, we have a sense of individualism and a lost sense of bliss. And death is the closest thing, or jouissance, a sense of bliss that might come from an orgasmic experience. Those are moments of a little death. So these thrills are like that, the seeking of death. But then to contrast that with who has the experience or perhaps the privilege to not already be surrounded by a situation where death is seen constantly or death is experienced in their life, right? And so we see already a racial politics built into the privileges of skiing. And then also an observation, if you don't already know about the ski industry, it is very white. It is a very white sport. So I want to contrast this with the work of Jack DeForbes. He is an indigenous scholar, and his book is Columbus and Other Cannibals, a Wetiko disease of exploitation, imperialism, and terrorism. And what we might do to contrast this perspective about a European sensibility, a white sensibility that I think Bataille is speaking to, from a different orientation of, that Jack Forbes offers. I've come to the conclusion that imperialism and exploitation are forms of cannibalism, and in fact, are precisely those forms of cannibalism which are most diabolical or evil. Traditional ritualistic cannibalism, so-called, found among many folk people, was essentially an act of eating a small portion of a dead enemy's flesh in order to gain part of the strength or power of that person, or to show respect in a spiritual way for that person. Cannibalism, as I define it, is the consuming of another's life for one's own private purpose or profit. Thus, the wealthy exploiter eats the flesh of the oppressed workers. The wealthy matron eats the lives of her servants. The imperialist eats the flesh of the conquered, and so on. Anglo-American imperialism is a form of cannibalism designed to eat Indians and also to consume the native people's land and resources. The wealthy and exploitative literally consume the lives of those that they exploit. There is no respect for the peon whose life is being eaten, no ceremony, no mystical communication, only self-serving consumption. And so we see this with Vail. I mean, it is explicitly stated, you can buy a Monopoly board game of the Vail conglomeration, right? The eating up of smaller mom and pop shops, but also the political economy of how they treat their workers, looking at price differences in passes, competition between, so Icon is another conglomerate, and then another up-and-coming conglomerate in the ski industry is the Powder Pass Resorts. And I want to speak specifically to the Arizona Snow Bowl resort, because there was a lawsuit brought on them by the Navajo Nation versus the United States Forest Services. And this was the decision by the circuit judge. In this case, American Indians ask us to prohibit the federal government from allowing the use of artificial snow for skiing on a portion of a public mountain sacred in their religion. At the heart of their claim is the planned use of recycled wastewater, which contains 0.0001 human waste to make artificial snow. The plaintiffs claim the use of such snow on a sacred mountain desecrates the entire mountain, desecrates their religious ceremonies, and injures their religious sensibilities. We're called upon to decide whether this government-approved use of artificial snow on government-owned park land violates the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 and other statutes, and we hold that it does not, and affirm the district court's denial of relief on all grounds. And this is just one example of ceded territory, unceded territory, or sacred land that are of mountains for the tribal, the First Nation communities, and the different treatment of how the land is stewarded, how it is treated, who belongs, how we cultivate that land, contrasted with a governmental perspective of public land, which can be easily privatized. So technically, Vail Resorts is on public land, but only Vail can install lifts and set up commercial property there. So I want to conclude by quoting Jessica Hernandez from her book Fresh Banana Leaves. This is the book that is currently a part of the Office of the Tribal Liaisons reading group. So if you aren't familiar with this group, it's phenomenal. Sami Waitua is right here, our tribal liaison. I know David is a part of it as well. And it's really a phenomenal group for learning more about a different perspective than we're typically taught about a Western ethos or education. So when white men and people who have political power serve as governing agents over our natural resources and do not respect indigenous sovereignty, they're practicing a form of eco-colonialism. I refer to eco-colonialism as the three layers from settler colonialism that continue to impact our environments and landscapes. These three layers include white people governing over our natural resources and indigenous lands without consulting indigenous peoples of those lands or respecting indigenous sovereignty. 2, the severe altering of our landscapes due to settler colonialism and the ideologies it introduced, including climate change impacts. And then finally, 3, the lack of resources offered to indigenous or communities of color who already experience the impacts of climate change that oftentimes result in displacement. So this is also a call for me as I continue to do this work and think about my relationship to the land and my relationship to supporting Vail Resorts and Tom's relationship. These aren't easy questions, but they're ones that we have to keep in the forefront of our minds when we're thinking about mountains. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I want to start by thanking the Humanities Center. Thank you to Brian, who I lost, there you are, lost sight of, for including me in this panel. I'm just delighted. Thank you also to Mark Ceder, who suggested my name for this panel. In fact, I know Mark because he's spoken to my first-year LLC students in my Italian Renaissance Literature course when we look at the letter that I'm going to present to you tonight and help students kind of connect that with the great work that he's doing in Outdoor Adventures. And he even helped me lead my students through the canyon behind USD to make that experiential event for them. So thank you for that. So tonight, my plan was to present to you a letter by this figure. This person's name is Francesco Petrarca, otherwise known as Francis Petrarch. He is living, oops, sorry about that. Let me do this. He's living in Italy, in and around Italy from 1304 to 1374. So we're traveling a little bit in space, geographically. We're traveling quite a bit in time. But I want to thank Professor Keeling for that really powerful talk, and I'm hoping that we can make some connections. I think so. Some of the themes that came up was this idea of kind of how the landscape of the mountains propels us to ask questions of ourselves. So I think we see that happening in this letter, even though it was written, like I said, so long ago. So my plan is to read to you some of these passages, kind of guide you through them in what I hope is a lively way. I'm with Renaissance texts a lot, so sometimes my idea of what is lively is not what is lively to the general public, but I will do my best. A couple of more things I want to say about this figure. One is that he's often considered a protagonist of this cultural shift that we see happening in Italy and around Italy in the 14th century that today is often described as Renaissance humanism. And you know, as a humanist myself or a scholar of the humanities, I don't really like to put labels on things, but I think that when looking at this letter, which embodies a lot of these Renaissance humanistic concepts, we can see something quite special going on. So hopefully you will see some of those things as we go through. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a letter. Why am I talking about Renaissance humanism? Because it is a letter in which this person describes his climb of a real mountain. It is dated April 26, 1336, although I will let you know why we may not believe him at the end of this talk, and it is addressed to his confessor. So Petrarch tells us, "Today I made the ascent of the highest mountain in this region, which is not improperly called Ventosum." So Ventosum is the Latin term meaning windy, and we would call this today Mount Ventoux. This is in Provence in the south of France, where where Petrarch was living at the time, and it is most famous today by being one of the hardest legs of the Tour de France. So if you look that up, you can see some really great videos of people struggling up that mountain. And he tells us right away, why is it that he made this ascent? He says, my only motive was the wish to see what so great an elevation had to offer. So he basically does it to see what's up there and for fun. This is one of the early examples, we have, at least, within the time frame that we're talking about, of kind of a recreational mountain climb, which is quite startling, because I would guess, I think I know from looking at texts, that life is kind of hard enough at this time, where you don't really have a lot of people climbing mountains, making their lives harder just for fun. He goes on to say that I have lived in this region from infancy, and so consequently the mountain, which is visible from a great distance, was ever before my eyes. So kind of this, his whole life he's been seeing this thing on the horizon, and it's been, alluring him, to use that word, calling to him. Something else happened, though. Petrarch says that the idea took a special hold of me when, in reading, as we all do for fun, right, Livy's History of Rome yesterday, why not, I happened upon the place where Philip of Macedon, the same who waged war against the Romans, ascended Mount Haemus in Thessaly. And it seems to me that a young man in his private life may be well excused for attempting what an aged king could undertake without arousing criticism. So here we see the first example of kind of Petrarch's characteristic snarkiness, which I love. So a couple of things going on here. One is, I would say, maybe the audacity of Petrarch to imply this equivalency between this epic, episode from ancient Roman history to what he's doing in his private life. And on the flip side, he's like elevating what he's doing for fun with what an ancient monarch has done. So this is really one of these kind of tenets of humanism that I mentioned. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the distance between, let me see, I always mess this up. Let me see if I can explain this. The distance between Philip of Macedon and Petrarch is double the distance, or more, between Petrarch and us. So it would be less absurd, I should say, for us to get up right now and climb Mount Coles together in San Diego because we read about Petrarch. And this is what Petrarch does. This is kind of the immediacy of the relationship that he feels with ancient authors. So it's pretty interesting. But let's see how he pulls it off. I mentioned to you that Mount Ventoux is a serious mountain, and so he can't do this alone. So he needs to look for a companion. And unfortunately, he says that when he started looking around to his friends, he found that, strangely enough, hardly one of them seemed suitable. And now we're going to get a list of basically all of the things that are wrong with each of his friends. He's very direct. He says this one was too apathetic, didn't care enough. This one, sounds like me, was over-anxious. This one's too slow. That one's too hasty. This one's too sad. You don't want to take a sad person on a mountain climb, but this one's over-cheerful. That's definitely not good. One, I can't believe this. This is his friends, right? One's more simple, right, meaning unintelligent. One's more sagacious than I desired. I feared this one's taciturnity, meaning this one's not going to talk at all, but this other one's loquacity. This person's going to talk way too much. And so I rejected all of those who were likely to irritate me by their excessive enthusiasm. Well, so hopefully Petrarch is coming to life for you. So what does he do? He says, I finally turned homeward for aid and proposed the ascent to my only brother, and this is his brother Gerardo. Now, I must say, I'm going to be grasping at straws a little bit because I'm an only child, so I only know about sibling relationships, looking at other people and looking at my own kids. But Gerardo strikes me at this moment as being the typical younger sibling, because when Petrarch proposes the trip, he says that Gerardo was delighted and gratified beyond measure by the thought of holding a place as a friend as well as a brother. So this younger sibling's like, I can't believe you thought of me and you want me on this journey, and he accepts. The other part of that relationship, Petrarch's vision of Gerardo, of his younger brother, Gerardo, it seems to me that Petrarch sees Gerardo as being kind of maybe that golden child that always seems to be able to make the right decisions in life without trying too hard. Whereas Petrarch feels like he always wants to do the right thing and find kind of spiritual perfection for himself, but it's so hard for him. He has so many stumbling blocks. And he talks about these in his writings. So we have the pair, right? Petrarch and his brother, who are going to start on the journey. So again, you have 26th of April, 1336. This is perhaps the journey that they took. Petrarch tells us that at the time fixed, the time we had planned, we left the house they're living in Provence on foot, and by evening we reached, and I apologize for my French pronunciation, Maliosin, which is a small village that you can see here on the very left, which lies at the foot of the mountain to the north. And then he speaks about the mountain. It's very steep and an almost inaccessible mass of stony soil. So a couple of specs about this mountain, if you're not familiar with meters, I am not myself, it's about 6,270 feet. So it's a legitimate mountain that they're about to climb. And so they start their journey from this village, and then in an area not too far, we may imagine, we found an old shepherd in one of the mountain dales, who tried at great length to dissuade us from the ascent, saying that some 50 years before he had, in the same ardor of youth, reached the summit, but had gotten nothing for his pains except fatigue and regret and clothes and body torn by the rocks and briars, and no one, as far as this old shepherd knew or his companions knew, had ever tried the ascent before or after him. And then Petrarch says, but his counsels increased rather than diminished our desire to proceed, since youth is suspicious of warnings. So they're like, yeah, old man, that sounds fantastic. We're going to keep going. And in fact, he says that the old man, finding his efforts were in vain, went a little way with us and pointed out a rough path among the rocks, uttering many admonitions, which he continued to send after us even after we had left him behind. So I feel really bad because this poor guy is like, stop. And they're like, we don't care. We're going to do this whether you like it or not. So then the ascent really starts. And this is where we start to see Petrarch using this, what was likely a real event, to serve his literary agenda. We start seeing how this mountain climb becomes full of metaphors. Petrarch says that while Gerardo, his brother, chose a direct path straight up the ridge, I weakly took an easier one, which in fact descended. And when I was called back and the right road was shown me, I replied that I had hoped to find a better way around on the other side, and that I didn't mind going farther if the path were only less steep. But this was just an excuse for my laziness. And when the others had already reached a considerable height, I was still wandering in the valleys. I had failed to find an easier path, and I had only increased the distance and the difficulty of the ascent. And when I reached my brother, who while waiting for me had ample opportunity to rest, I was tired and irritated. So when this happens, Petrarch soon says in his letter that he sits down in one of the valleys, and I transferred my winged thoughts from things corporal, meaning things that are surrounding me, the physical effort of climbing this mountain, to the immaterial, to the spiritual, addressing myself as follows. So he starts kind of contemplating and talking to himself. And what he says is, what you have repeatedly experienced today in the ascent of this mountain happens to you, as to many, in the journey toward the blessed life. So for Petrarch, again, he's seeing his brother who has recently become a monk. And for Petrarch, this is an example of someone who sacrifices his own desires to do something that Petrarch sees as more noble, right? And self-sacrificing. And Petrarch feels like in life, he's just going around circles, taking the easy way out. Some of the things that he doesn't mention in the passages I told you, but mentions later, there's kind of two stumbling blocks that he has. One is that he is really into this woman who's married, and he writes all his poetry to her, and he feels like she is a distraction to spiritual perfection. The other one is that he is famous, and he really likes it. He loves when people approve of him and give him compliments. He's very human. So for Petrarch, he's unable to reach those heights more directly like he thinks his brother can. Okay, so we're starting to see how this whole thing is an allegory. Let's see what happens when he finally does make it to the top. This is, as you can see, a modern-day view from the top of Mount Ventoux. And Petrarch tells us on the peak of the mountain there is a little level place, and here we could at last rest our tired bodies. And then he starts describing, which is why a lot of historians, I think, believe this really happened, because it's with great realism that he describes the effects of this elevation, right? 6,000 feet up. He says, at first, owing to the unaccustomed quality of the air and the effect of the great sweep of view spread out before me, I stood like one dazed. I beheld the clouds under our feet, and what I had read of Athos and Olympus seemed less incredible, as I myself witnessed the same things from a mountain of less fame. I turned my eyes toward Italy, which I don't think a human can actually perceive Italy from this point, but he's kind of looking in that direction. He knows where it is. Toward Italy, whither my heart most inclined. The Alps, rugged and snow-capped, seemed to rise close by, although they were really at a great distance. So if any of you have had experience at a great height, I wonder if you have also experienced this kind of disorientation and a misunderstanding of space as you look at these huge features of the landscape. I have definitely felt this before in the Sierra Nevadas, and I embarrassedly had to crawl, in fact, for the last 100 yards or so of a trail because I was so disoriented by this vista that opened up below me. So I just kind of crawled to find stability. But they were high mountains, so I'm not going to beat myself up about that. So what else does he do on the top of the mountain? A lot of human things. First, he starts freaking out about turning 40. I kid you not. This is something that touches me deeply right now. I'm not going to say any more about that, but yes, I totally relate to that. And then he says, I rejoiced in my progress, I mourned my weakness, and I commiserated the universal instability of human conduct. So he's so lost in his thoughts, and he said, I then forgot where I was and our object or goal in coming, but at last I dismissed my anxieties, which were better suited to other surroundings, and resolved to look about me and see what we had come to see, right? To pull himself back from his thoughts. So this is what he says. While I was thus dividing my thoughts, now turning my attention from some terrestrial object that lay before me, and now raising my soul as I had done my body to higher planes, it occurred to me to look into my copy of St. Augustine's Confessions that I always have about me. So apparently he always carries St. Augustine's Confessions. I mean, this guy also reads Livy for fun, so what do we know? And I opened the compact little volume with the intention of reading whatever came to hand. And this is something that was very typical at his time. Usually would do it with a Bible or some other sacred text, and you would kind of open it, and the first thing you see is supposed to be a divine message of some sort. So this is what he decides to do in this beautiful place. Petrarch tells us, my brother, wanting to hear something of St. Augustine's from my lips, stood attentively by, and I call him, and God too, to witness that where I first fixed my eyes, the first thing I saw opening this thing, it was written, and men go about to wonder at the heights of the mountains, and the mighty ways of the sea, and the wide sweep of rivers, and the circuit of the ocean, and the revolution of the stars, but they themselves consider not. I was ashamed, he said, and asking my brother, who was anxious to hear more, not to annoy me, I closed the book, angry with myself that I should still be admiring earthly things, when nothing is wonderful but the soul. Then in truth I was satisfied that I had seen enough of the mountain, and I turned my inward eye upon myself, and from that time not a syllable fell from my lips until we reached the bottom again. So he starts to descend in silence, and he's thinking about what this allure of the mountain means to him. He says, I thought in silence of the lack of good counsel in us mortals, how foolish we as humans are, right? Who neglect what is noblest in ourselves. We scatter our energies in all directions. We waste ourselves because what we look outside of us for what is to be found only within. How many times did I turn back that day to glance at the summit of the mountain, which seemed scarcely a cubit high compared with the range of human contemplation? So Petrarch's very hard on himself, as he always is, and he's ashamed that, he was substituting some kind of search for inner truth, right, about himself, and he was substituting that for this climb of the mountain. We could also say that he wouldn't have come to that realization without this experience, this transformative experience that he had. So he kind of leaves us with some ambiguity of how to read his whole experience. But I want to float down a little bit, because this is Petrarch we're talking about, and leave you with one last detail, and then I'll conclude. And that detail is that, again, he's descending. He's so wrapped up in thought that he says he had no consciousness of the difficulties of the way amidst these preoccupations, which I have revealed in this letter, that we came long after dark, but with the full moon lending us its friendly light to that little inn which we had left that morning before dawn. So as a recap, he checked into this inn the day before. He left before dawn. He scaled a 6,000-foot mountain. He's now come back in basically the middle of the night. And then Petrarch tells us completely, straight in the face, he wants us to believe him. In the time during which the servants have been occupied in preparing our supper, I have spent hurriedly jotting down these experiences on the spur of the moment, because I'm just that good. So anyway, I hope that you feel like you know somebody from the 14th century a little bit better than you did before. And I'll stop there.
It's exciting to see everybody here. This day has been on my mind for a while. So again, my name is Mark Ceder. I work in outdoor adventures. I'm excited to be here sharing a little bit of my take on the allure of the mountains. So my background is really dealing with fun. I use experiential education, I use adventure, uncertainty and risk-taking as powerful tools for learning. I guide students in diverse natural landscapes to foster connections to the land, connections to a close-knit group of peers, and most importantly, connections with themselves. I learned Aldo Leopold once said that one of the highest outcomes of recreation is changing the perceptions of others, and that's reshaping how we see nature, beauty, justice, compassion. I think these experiences hopefully spark curiosity and wonder, engaging the whole person with the goal of inspiring lasting transformation. Now, I'm not sure if you can tell. If I pulled out my Whoop monitor, you could see my heart rate is a little bit elevated. And partly it's knowing that I was going to share this picture with you. So here, this photo, it's 10 a.m. I've been hiking for 9 hours. I've kicked a couple of steps into the snow. I'm perched precariously on a 30-degree snowshoe at an elevation of about 12,500 feet. Instead of plainly focusing on my next step up, I'm twisted around, snapping a photo while trying not to fall. I'm also hyper aware that the day before, a couple people had fallen in this exact spot, requiring a helicopter medical evac with life-threatening injuries. So I'm here. I'm not striving for the summit at this moment, but I'm praying. I am praying that President Harris recalls his glissade training from a few days ago in order to descend safely. You might ask how I ended up in this situation, and I'll save that story for later. So what is it about mountains? Why do mountains captivate adventurers, poets, artists, scientists, philosophers, religious leaders, USD students, and presidents alike? So in my attempt to answer this question, I went back to my beginning. I was born and raised in the mountains of New Jersey. I don't even know why I did air quotes because they're mountains. But while this view, so we're 900 feet above farmland in the valley below. This was a hike I did a lot. It may not evoke feelings of sublime. I didn't know that this definitely didn't evoke feelings of sublime for me. But I did grow up noticing aspects of mountain life that have helped me connect in ways to connect to faraway places, places I've never been before, but I have some understanding. I remember when it would snow as a child at my house on top of the mountain, but it was raining in the valley. I remember waking up to sunny days and then driving down the mountain into the clouds on my way to school. I remember traffic from the New York City tourists during ski season. I remember my friends' parents wouldn't want to drive them to my house in the dark because of the steep, winding roads. So for me, like, this place is home. So this mountain here, I don't know if anybody recognizes, but mountains come in all shapes and sizes with their own personality. Mountains are universal symbols shared by diverse people and cultures around the world. From time immemorial, indigenous peoples have been drawn to mountains rooted deep in spiritual, cultural, and ancestral connections to the land. Mountains are often viewed not merely as physical landscapes, but as sacred beings embodying immense significance. The Allure transcends notions of adventure or escape. It's about belonging, spiritual guidance, and the sustenance of life and community. And this here is Mount Kuchama, which you might know as Tecate Peak, which is a local mountain that has special significance to the Kumeyaay people. You might know this view. For thousands of years, the Awanichi have called this part of the mountains home. Awani, meaning big mouth, referring to the valley view. For many visitors, Tunnel View in Yosemite National Park is a symbol of America's greatest idea, while to others, this view symbolizes displacement of indigenous peoples from their ancestral homelands. So we all bring our unique identity and cultural spaces, and the mountains create space for that. These mountains appear to transcend our concept of time. They represent something permanent and ever-changing, and serve as a reminder to the natural forces that slowly reshape them over time. This particular place has a special view for outdoor adventures. So I'm gonna take you back to 1986. This was the first group photo that's still in the Outdoor Adventures office. And on our 30th anniversary, we sent a group of students, let me see if I can get back. We sent a group of students to replicate it. And so it wasn't just another trip, like they had one sole purpose, right? Like their purpose was to get this photo, and they really lived into it. And it really reminds me of like when you're climbing a mountain, you often have that one sole purpose that gives you some meaning to connect with something larger than yourself. And this photo has lived beyond their time at USD. So let's take back even further. This is a picture of Mont Blanc. I'm going to go to Europe. So about a couple hundred years ago, 200 years ago, during the second half of the 18th century, a significant shift in perspective began to take shape in Europe. And I say Europe because like during that time, there was like a revolution and like starting a country here. So in Europe, up until this time, mountains were largely seen as an aesthetically repellent, desolate, inhospitable, and dangerous place. However, as scientific inquiry and the human quest for discovery expanded during the Enlightenment, so did the desire to understand the natural world. And this era marked the beginning of mountaineering, where challenging pursuits became intertwined with the broader aim of exploration. So you needed a reason to go climb a mountain that was scientific, not just because you wanted to. During the Romantic period, John Dennis described an aesthetic experience as a combination of contrary feelings such as delightful terror or terrible joy. Edmund Burke introduced the concept of sublime beauty, celebrating the majesty of the natural environment. These works emphasize individual experience, emotion, and a deep connection to nature as a source of inspiration. As a result, Europeans flocked to the mountains. Here you can tell who the guide is because of the rope with some clients climbing. You see what this climber is holding is an alpenstock, which was one of the tools that they used to climb. At this time, the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, train travel boosted access to mountains, fueling the rise of alpine tourism. Over the next century, this transformed our relationships with the mountains, which continue to evolve today. Tourists often took dangerous risks and made poor decisions, while local guides, many of whom were poor farmers or shepherds, gladly accepted payment to lead them. Guiding became a way for mountain communities to support families as demand for exploration and adventure in the mountains grew rapidly during this period. One of the earliest accidents that happened, would involve 3 Englishmen and a Swiss guide. They crashed 4,000 feet over a sheer face, landed in the glacier below. There's a lot of details from this that I'm going to skip, but it's known as the Matterhorn disaster, and it fascinated the general public more than it horrified them. There was grim interest in the details of the disaster. Dying in the mountain had conferred a majesty upon them. Something I found really interesting as I was looking at this, like, I had no idea, but do y'all know what kind of dog that is? St. Bernard. Do y'all know St. Bernard is a patron saint of like mountain climbing? So St. Bernard had a monastery in the Alps that would often like he would find lost hikers and travelers and help people pass through the Alps. And that was, I think, around 1000 BC. Or, yeah, it was a long time ago, way longer ago than this. So during the 1800s is when most of the Alps were climbed for the first time by Europeans. Conquering these harsh summits became a source of national pride. It was the late 1800s that the modern Olympics emerged. So during this era, there was a desire to push boundaries and test human endurance and achievement. Right after that, early 1900s, we had some world wars. So mountain climbing in Europe took a break during the wars, but picked back up with renewed fever afterwards. At that point, the 8,000-meter peaks of the Himalayas were the last frontier, the greatest mountain ranges, and the most inaccessible mountains on Earth. Climbing these peaks would redefine the boundary of human possibility, and the British in 1953 achieved the greatest prize when Edmund Hillary of New Zealand and Tenzing Norgay of Nepal were the first men to reach the summit. News reached the streets of London at the same time, just in time for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. So just like imagine that like people are like lined up and there's like procession and like the whole coronation, and they're also celebrating that the British climbed Mount Everest. But Tenzing Norgay is like the magic sauce here. Like this was his 7th attempt at Everest. The year prior, he had come within 248 meters of the top. For him, climbing was both a calling and a livelihood for the Sherpa community. And now, 70 years later, we have traffic jams on the top of Everest. The country of Nepal is dealing with how to manage the economy of tourism along with the negative impacts to the environment that are coming along with that. I love this quote by Tenzing Norgay. I've climbed my mountain, but I still must live my life. So today, many people exist in worlds which are humanly arranged, themed, and controlled. One forgets that there are environments which do not respond to the flick of the switch and which have their own rhythms and orders of existence. Mountains correct this amnesia. They serve as a mirror to our lives, reflecting both the inner and outer worlds we navigate. They embody the profound questions of existence, highlighting the tensions and the balance at the heart of the human experience. Mountains have the power to reshape our understandings of ourselves and our own interior landscapes. Mountains return us to the priceless capacity for wonder, which can so insensibly be leached away by modern existence. Mountains can recalibrate our response to stress. Our brains need to experience some real danger once in a while, otherwise we'll make mountains out of molehills. Have you ever wondered why you feel good when you're adventuring in the mountains? It's not just clean mountain air and water. Exercising with others in nature can release a host of feel-good hormones. And when you add in feeling a little stress, your body produces adrenaline, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. You literally experience a physical, emotional, spiritual, and chemical high. It's no wonder we seek out these experiences. Now, back to that story I started with. So I'm at a campus event, and President Harris casually makes a statement, I want to climb Mount Whitney. Up until this point, like my time with him had been in Tecolote Canyon, hiking with students. I literally said to him, off the top of my head, I can think of 100 places you should go hike instead of Mount Whitney. But he was convincing, and through future conversations, like I eventually got on board. I think in part because I realized he was doing this, whether I was part of it or not because I was really excited personally to do this. It took a lot of preparation. He did a lot of hiking. I did some hiking. We needed to get ourselves into shape for this. Mount Whitney's not the type of climb that you just get to, or not the type of mountain you just get to casually walk up, right? Like we needed permits, we needed to acclimatize ourselves and be ready to perform at high altitudes. Mount Whitney is 14,500 and something feet. So if you've ever tried to schedule a meeting with President Harris, like you know how busy his schedule is. Now, I wasn't looking for 30 minutes here or there. I was looking for days. Like if he was going to do this and I was going to help him, he needed to show commitment on his end in order for me to fulfill the commitment on my end. So he did, we made our plans, and we kind of started out at sea level. Before we hiked Mount Whitney, we tested ourselves at Mount San Jacinto. So I climbed it with students in my class one spring, and a couple weeks later in May, he followed suit. So 10,834 feet, like you would definitely feel the impacts of altitude. So that was like a good test for what it's like to walk up that much elevation. So now it's June of 2017. With great anticipation and some nerves, like we set out on this 4-day adventure with the hope of standing atop Mount Whitney on the 3rd day. Now, I don't really spend this much time with coworkers. We're talking like 24 hours a day in the car, eating, sleeping, camping. It was a lot, and I think back to kind of like, what kind of companion do you want when you embark on something like this? And I'll save those details for another time. But we're up there, a couple days acclimatizing. We're hiking amongst the bristlecone pines. We practice glissading. It's like technical sliding in the event that we found ourselves in some snow. I was having a great time. But in the back of my head, like those peaks were staring at us, and we knew that we were here for a business trip. Okay. So it's now the day of our climb. We wake up at midnight. We pack up camp at Whitney Portal, which is at 8,374 feet, start hiking around 1 a.m. It's the middle of the night. There's no moon, no moonlight illuminating the trail at all. Like our headlamps were allowing us to see like what was immediately in front of us. Nobody's cracking jokes. Nobody's asking like, what did you do yesterday? We were just walking in the dark in silence, kind of like it was a meditative state. Putting one foot in front of the other, just me in my head staring at the ground. So we did this for a few hours, monitoring our exertion level, taking short breaks, making sure we're staying hydrated. I was focused on just getting to the top as best we could. So after about 5 miles, the sun began to rise and the grandeur of the mountain began to reveal itself. The Sierra Nevada are called the Range of Light, and methodically moving at 11,000 feet and seeing the towering gray cliffs change colors. They were like a blue hue, an orange. They were, kind of glowing this deep orange. It really it was breathtaking. It's a sight I will never forget. And then we make it to about 12,000 feet. This is trail camp. We're making great time. Everything was going according to plan. It's a moment to celebrate, but we're staring at this, 1,700 foot kind of wall that we needed to climb up. And typically, people call this the 99 switchbacks that go up 1,700 feet over about 2 miles that bring you up to trail crest, up the top there. But at this point, the snow hadn't cleared and it was still a little bit icy, so we couldn't hike the trail. But we knew if we got to trail crest, we'd be in a great spot to reach the summit that day. So we celebrated down here with some pictures, knowing we were in a good mood, and I figured whatever happened next, at least we'd have some photos of us smiling at this point. Okay. So now we're above trail camp. We're on this snowfield. Time seemed to slow. I felt both joy and fear. I knew we were in a risky situation with many things that can go wrong. The voice of everyone who told me, don't let the president hurt himself, was screaming in my head. I knew my goal wasn't to climb the mountain, but to keep him safe. And yet for a moment, I was calculating how long would it take me to get to the summit. Summit fever is real. My mind slipped away to what I thought should be happening, but the mountain quickly returned me to the reality of what was happening in front of me when a snowball came bouncing down from above. I was totally calm and anxious about my own predicament as I watched President Harris glide this down the chute, which this was practice. He did not look this cool and comfortable when we were up at 12,000 feet. So I watched as he like glissaded himself down. Once he was safely out of danger, like I was instantly transported back to my childhood. Glissading is like one of the funnest things I could do. I like had a ball, like flying down, glissaded down the mountain like at a speed worthy of Olympic bobsled run. I wasn't trying to show off, and I didn't want to get hurt, but it was fun. So the funny thing is that during the days leading up to this climb, like I knew we weren't going to make it to the top. Like there were accurate reports of snow conditions that were beyond our ability and outside of our risk tolerance. But we still tried. And for a moment, like I was even tempted to just like push beyond. Mountains not only shape the landscape, but they profoundly impact the lives of those who climb them. We're drawn by the allure of the scenery or the thrill of the accomplishment, but the most remarkable revelations happen within ourselves. While we often focus on the physical demands, it's the mental challenge that proves to be far greater. Make no mistakes, like climbing this was really tough. With every single from my body urging me to turn back, like, do I have a blister? My back hurts, like, it's hard to breathe, my head hurts, is that a bloody nose? Like, all of these things, like, your body's like, you should turn back. But every single step is a choice over and over and over again to move towards that goal. You confront unexpected obstacles and endless chances to quit, but to reach the summit, perseverance is key. And we never know how much perseverance we possess until we need to. I knew we'd have fun in the mountains that day, but at what cost? We didn't make it to the top, but I mean, I will throw this in here because we did make it to the summit at a later date, but that's a story for another day. We'd already committed significant amount of time and energy to conquer the useless. I wasn't sure if this experience would douse President Harris's goal or stoke the fire more, and that was a risk that we had to take. I knew I wasn't going to be the one to tell him he couldn't make the summit that day. The mountain needed to show him. We had a nice drive back to San Diego, but avoided the topic of a second attempt. Here we are a few months later, having successfully achieved our goals, and I'm still discovering what it actually meant. I love this quote by René Dumas. You cannot stay on the summit forever. You have to come down again, so why bother in the first place? Just this, what is above knows what is below, but what is below does not know what is above. One climbs, one sees. One descends, one sees no longer, but one has seen. And I don't have the enthusiasm of Jay, but I'm going to end with this this video from a student. How are you feeling?
I have never done anything so painfully exhilarating in my entire life. This will be imprinted on my life forever. I feel like I was struck with awe, and I'm still in awe, but now I feel like I've overcame something. It's more of kind of like I've surpassed a challenge. I have surmounted a challenge where I was kind of going in hopeful, optimistic, very I don't know. So now it's just I feel very I can do anything at this point. If I can do that, then the world's kind of your oyster. So
I'll end with, that's why I climb mountains.